The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed implicit biases when it comes to minority health, especially for Black people. This alone is one of the primary reasons so many African Americans are afraid to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Joining me to discuss implicit biases, historical healthcare skepticism, and why taking the COVID vaccine may just be the thing you need is Southern University professor Dr. Sherice Nelson. Dr. Sherice Nelson, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I am excited about this conversation, so let's start with the mention of implicit bias. Explain to people at home who don't know about it what it is and how it has been seen with COVID-19.
Absolutely. So when we talk about implicit bias, what we have to understand is that it's really organized around this idea of racism. And the idea that racism has like these 4 different layers, right? There is institutional racism, which means that the institution was erected and started with racist ideas in mind. There's systematic racism, where there are systems that are in place that help to keep the furthering of certain races versus other races alive and well. There's this internalized racism where we believe stereotypes about other people because of our racial upbringings or what we've seen. And then there is the internalized, goodness gracious, and then there is the one where the interpersonal, okay, where we use it interpersonally. And when we think about the interpersonal piece, that's where we see the implicit bias show up. Is in this interpersonal piece where I believe you to be a certain way because of the relationships I've had with you, and then I record that as a memory. And because I record that as a memory, then I use that in my everyday societal upbringings. So an example to COVID, right, or example in healthcare, there is a misnomer that Black people can tolerate more pain. And because Black people can tolerate more pain, then they're less likely to be believed when they come in complaining of certain symptoms, right? And so why does this have to do with COVID? Because if I come in and say, I can't barely breathe, or I'm struggling breathing, and you then decide, I don't really believe her, or he or her, right? I don't really believe them. And so I send them home, right, with a respiratory illness that's allowing them to essentially die. Then now they're at home and have died of COVID when they should have then been hospitalized. Right. And so it's this implicit bias has everything to do with these pillars of racism that we have seen at all different layers of our society that we don't like to attack, because we really think that we've rooted it out in many ways because there's laws on the books that says that it is an unequitable and unfair. Right.
Well, we're attacking it tonight, so that's the point of this conversation. So just so you know, like earlier in the show, we use examples throughout history where American medicine has failed Black people. Do you believe that this is still something that's happening today?
Oh, absolutely. We know that Black women are 3 times more likely to pass away in childbirth than white women. And recent studies have shown us that if that Black woman has a Black doctor, that child and the mother are more likely to live 50% of the time. So we know that data shows that these things are still happening, but that should make us skeptical about participating in the healthcare industry altogether. And the reason is because a lot of the Black doctors that we see are coming out of institutions that are made, founded, and ran by us, right? 40% of all healthcare workers come out of historically Black colleges and universities. Right. And so with that being said, there is hope for us inside of the system if more of us are participating, if more of us are speaking out, if more of us are active.
Yeah, and Xavier University is one of those because they put the most Black people in medical school, and so that starts that trend in helping to put more Black people in doctors' offices and things like that.
Absolutely. Xavier is very well known for that, and they're shuttling many of them to Morehouse School of Medicine, to Howard University School of Medicine, and to Meharry, right? All HBCUs that are in the southern region. So you are exactly right. Xavier plays a huge role in getting those types of students, or getting students to those medical institutions, or getting those students to schools that are equipped to train our students. And then let's also remember Southern, right, with the top nursing program in the state, right? So the HBCUs are doing the heavy lift of getting our students to places where they can speak up about the disparities that we do see in healthcare.
Yeah, and there are a lot of those. Let's talk about the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, which a lot of experts have said this is the light at the end of the tunnel. But so many black people have said they are flat out not going to get the vaccine when it's their turn. What do you believe is the reasoning behind this?
Well, let's look at the numbers, right? If you look at KFF today, which is the Kaiser Foundation that tracks health disparities throughout the country, 42% of whites here in the state of Louisiana have been vaccinated in comparison to 13%, right? And so some of it's just availability. Some of it is being for them access to the vaccine, right? I think the larger piece of it is that COVID-19 was politicized by both sides very, very early. And so based upon your own political belief is where you align when it comes to how you're going to deal with COVID. And because black people historically, as you've already stated, have had a mistrust of the medical system, right? We know based upon the Tuskegee experiment that black men were infected with syphilis and watched for years to see how it was going to affect them. We know that Henrietta Lacks's cells were taken from her and then were experimented on and provide really a baseline for a lot of the gynecological services that we have in healthcare today. So black people have a reason to be skeptical of the system. But the thing that I think that we have to kind of zoom in on is that the African-American woman responsible for the rollout of this coronavirus, his name is Dr. Kamikia S. Corbett, right?
She's behind one of the vaccines.
Right. Dr. Kamikia S. Corbett is from Hurdle Mills, North Carolina, right? She's from a rural community that knows what health disparities look like up close and personal. And so I think the difference right now, historically, is that we have a voice at the table. It doesn't mean that racism is gone. It doesn't mean that implicit bias is gone. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be cautious. But the level of fear that I often see in the community, I think is in some ways unwarranted.
Yeah, we're slowly chipping away at it, which is great progress. Just very slowly. You're a very avid researcher.
Yes.
What are some new things that have been discovered when it comes to black people contracting COVID-19 and the effects there?
Yes. So one of the biggest things that we have seen is the lack of vitamin D. So vitamin D deficiency, a study came out from Hoffman where he saw that 54% of African Americans who had contracted COVID had passed away because of, or had passed away also had a vitamin D deficiency. And so what we know about African Americans is that the melanin in our skin that keeps us looking younger, right? Also blocks our ability to be able to absorb vitamin D from the sun. And so the lack of vitamin D has played a role in contracting the coronavirus and then dying of the coronavirus. What we also know is that black children, right, are 5 times more likely than their white counterparts to then have asthma. And so the history of respiratory failure, respiratory issues in the black community plays a role. We know that pre-existing conditions such as diabetes and high blood pressure play a high role in your ability to survive COVID. And so what we know is that black people are dying at almost 3 times the rate as their white counterparts, and it has everything to do with a lot of these pre-existing conditions and a lot to do with the fact that we lack, or we are historically, we lack vitamin D.
Yeah, and then that goes back to the disparities, and it's just a layer upon layer.
It's a cycle, which is why I started off by telling you about this idea about that racism has these 4 layers. Because if we get, what we have to understand is we can't get hung up on one of the layers. We have to understand that each of the layers play a role consistently, and so we have to chip away those layers. We have to recognize institutions that were racially constructed and break them down. And then we also have to look inside of organizations that have systematic racism and break those things down, because that's the only way that we're going to heal this interpersonal racism that we see, and then this internalized racism where we believe these particular stereotypes about certain people.
Right, and stereotypes can really, that's a whole nother topic.
Right.
There's a partnership between Southern has when it comes to bringing the COVID-19 vaccine to areas that don't always get first dibs on health care and things like that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Southern right now has partnered with Care South and we are getting the Moderna vaccines. We have just concluded with all of our, everybody in the Allied Health, the School of Allied Health being vaccinated so that we can start reaching out to the community to become vaccinated. I know that we are vaccinating people on campus as we speak. And so we should see a surge in that here late in February. Right now we are still vaccinating people that are prescribed at the 65-year and older rate is still where we are. Hopefully very soon here, there was a report right before we had our discussion that the Biden administration should be extending another 2 million vaccinations. And so we should start to see a trickle-down effect here in the state of Louisiana, especially here at Southern, for there to be some reach out around that, because Senator Warren and Barbara Lee and Karen Bass wrote a letter to HHS and said, hey, we need more money to go to these types of communities that are underserved and are not getting the virus, or that are not getting the vaccine but are dying of the virus. Right. And so that partnership extends, you know, through government, and we have to recognize that at the state level, a good functioning centralized government helps then for the state to then address the needs of its people.
Yeah, such an incredible conversation. We could keep going, but you know, we run out of time. So,
absolutely, absolutely.
Dr. Sherice Nelson, thank you so much for just bringing us insight on this a very important conversation. I'm glad we were able to have it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And if you would like to know more about Dr. Sherice Nelson, you can head on over to our website, brprof.com. We'll be right back.